On the 13th of March 2002, a 13-year-old girl goes missing on her way home from school in broad daylight. What would follow would be 6 months of pain, while an unknowing family still held out every ounce of hope that their daughter could return home alive. But as the family of Milly Dowler held out hope that she would be found alive and well, the reality that she may not started to sink in. And over the next few years, a chain of events would lead police to face the reality that there was a serial killer on the loose. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about the disappearance of Milly Dowler and the story of Levi Bellfield.
So in this episode, we will be discussing a truly evil killer, and to do so we will be discussing and using information that is publicly available and in the public domain. Remember, all of these cases that we cover are true stories, and often they are incredibly terrifying true stories. So always, we say this every time, but please do exercise caution before watching some of these distressing videos. But first of all, let me get into this case by telling you a little bit more about Milly Dowler. So Milly was a 13-year-old schoolgirl who lived with her mother and father in a beautiful part of southwest London called Walton-on-Thames.
Close to home for me and you then, isn't it?
It is pretty much down the road for us. I mean, probably about 3 or 4 miles away from where we are right now.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah, it literally is that close to us. Quite scary, actually.
Well, as the story goes on, it will get scarier because there are people involved in this story prominently that you could say some of us have almost loose connections to.
Are you going to tell us what that connection is?
No, we'll get the story going
Okay.
first. Why don't you continue to tell me a bit more about Milly Dowler?
So Milly was described as a popular and intelligent young girl, and her friend Danielle Sykes actually said that she was one of the funniest people that she had ever met. She attended a school called Heathside School, which was in Weybridge, and her mum was actually a teacher there. She actually taught maths, which Joey has only just recently learned how to spell.
Cheers.
And by all accounts, she had a very happy and normal life. That was until March 21st, 2002.
Yeah, this must have been one of the worst days imaginable for the Dowler family. Obviously, you're going to be concerned at any point if your child is late home from school or something like that. But at the same time, you know, it's broad daylight and they have a lot of trust in their child. And like you say, they live in a fairly nice area, I would say. So not too concerning. However, once it gets to the point where she's a couple of hours late home, it's actually 2 hours past her curfew, the family do ring the police, and the police take it seriously. They jump into action straight away. They start scrolling through CCTV, and what they actually are able to do is find a digital trace of Milly. There are multiple CCTV images of where she's captured. Obviously, the first one being leaving school at 3:07 p.m. She's then captured on another bit of CCTV, and this is at Weybridge train station at 3:24 p.m. Now, Milly and her friend Danielle board a train to Walton-on-Thames and get off so that they could go to a cafe. They wanted to go have some food, have a bit of a catch up because they hadn't seen each other in quite a while. Weybridge-on-Thames was the stop before Milly would usually get off at Hersham, but she rung her dad, she checked it was okay with her dad, and everything was fine. Now at 4:05 p.m, the two girls leave the cafe, and Danielle, Milly's friend, is picked up by her sister. However, Milly opts to walk home. Remember, this is broad daylight at this time, and she's actually sighted around 3 minutes later by a friend of Milly's sister Gemma called Catherine. Now, Catherine was actually boarding a bus at the time, and she said that when she was getting onto the bus, she could see Milly, but by the time she got on the bus and looked out to have a look, Milly was no longer there. It was as if Milly had vanished into broad daylight.
So this is where the search for Milly absolutely commences, and there were over 100 police officers, wasn't there, straight away on the case. And it wasn't just that. There were completely other police forces that were mobilised, and this is where you effectively see helicopters already on the search, and also some detectives from another case that we've covered on the channel as well, wasn't there?
This is the Sarah Payne case,
yes,
isn't it?
Which is what we also called it, the Roy Whiting case.
Yes.
Basically, a young girl goes missing.
Young girl goes missing, and obviously in a similar area, geographically, definitely a similar area, similar part of the country. And therefore, it would have been a similar police force that would have been used. And if it wouldn't have been the exact same police force, i.e. Met, it would have been Surrey Police or the sister police force or whatever. So the foundations for this sort of search were very much in place, weren't they?
And that was only 2 years before that search of the Sarah Payne case, by the way. So, very much in the living memory of everyone that had worked on that as well. And it wasn't just that. Basically, then you see things like Crime Watch. The parents actually went on Crime Watch, and they actually did a reenactment to recreate Milly's last movements. And again, that's the sort of thing that can break open a case, and you can get a lot of feedback from that straight away. But actually, there wasn't very much there at all, really, was it?
There was something quite significant that happened on Crime Watch, though, and that was that whoever the police representation was, said that they didn't believe that Milly was taken by force due to obviously it being broad daylight, no one actually hearing or seeing any sort of commotion, and definitely no sign of a struggle, an attack, anything like that, didn't they?
Exactly that. And also, weirdly, I feel like on Crime Watch, you shouldn't necessarily be leading people too much to say what actually happened, because I feel like a lot of what they were discussing as well is that she might have run away potentially. And again, there wasn't a lot of evidence that she would have run away. So I do feel that the parents in times like this, and I can completely understand why, they always try and think of the best thing that could have happened in this situation. Her running away potentially is probably the best outcome here, that she's still safe and well and out there. But I find that a bit of a tough one to get my head around.
But there's very little, if any, logic behind it. Once again, we always speak about the actions of missing people before they go missing, and once again, it's just not in line with any of the actions that someone who is intentionally about to disappear is going to do. You don't go to the cafe with your friends, and you probably don't go to school that day. You're probably not too bothered about that sort of thing. So running away from home was something that I think at the time was more indicative of selling newspapers and things like that than actual sort of concrete evidence that the police were going on.
Yeah, exactly that. And what you might suspect after a big Crime Watch national TV show is that there were immediate news and immediate sort of leads for the police to go to. And that just wasn't the case with this case, unfortunately. It took over 6 months for the police to actually find evidence. And not only did you say earlier on, Jay, that there were CCTV combing and trying to find that, they actually found a break and a lead in the CCTV footage. This was of a Mazda sports car, and it was stationary in the area that Milly was generally in. And effectively, what we saw, and tell me if you remember this correctly, mate, but was there a figure next to the car?
Yeah, again, because of the time that it was, CCTV footage is always going to be grainy. But yeah, you could sort of see a silhouette, a figure of someone almost leaning down and talking to someone else inside the car. But that was really all we had to go on at that point.
And there was a big gap from that point, wasn't there? Basically, there was no footage of her being abducted or being taken. That was the last bit of footage that we had. And then the police really had to try and identify what happened next, and it certainly wasn't an easy task, bearing in mind it took them 6 months to get to that point.
Yeah, and it actually took multiple more months for any further developments to happen. But in the meantime, what was happening were every month, every couple of months or something, a new body was being found, right? And each time, you've got to understand that if you're Milly Dowler's family, your heart is in your stomach every time you read the news, you hear about this. You might hear that a body's been found somewhere on the news, and then you're sitting and you're waiting for your phone to ring and things like this. However, on September the 18th, 2002, Milly's remains were found in some woods in Yateley, Hampshire, over 30 miles away from Milly's home. The body was was obviously badly decomposed by this point, and therefore not only was Milly needed to be identified by dental records, it was too badly decomposed to find out a cause of death. Now, one thing that experts were able to establish here was that Milly's body had been in that spot for a significant amount of time. They were able to say that her body had been moved at some point, of course, but all of her possessions, her clothes, her phone, things like that, her wallet, her purse, nothing was found on her at the time. However, pollen experts were able to determine from the bedding of the ground that she was found on top of that that body had likely been in that vicinity, in that exact spot, in fact, for 6 months.
It must have been quite like a remote place then, because we see in so many of these cases, like a dog walker will come across something, and it happens relatively quickly once a body is dumped. So this must be in the middle of nowhere. It must have been nowhere near where people were walking around.
It's not quite in the middle of nowhere, to be honest. This is a spot where, you know, you might get dog walkers and things like that. So it was a bit of a mystery, but I do tend to go along with the sort of forensic experts that say that the body was there, and that's what I do believe in this case.
They know what they're talking about, to be fair. Those experts probably more than we would, to be fair. But yeah, like I thought that was a bit of a strange part of the case. But anyway, we'll trust the experts on that. So what you might be thinking now is that once poor Milly's body is actually found, that the police would be able to jump straight into action, use as much forensic evidence as they possibly could to formalize a suspect. But unfortunately, that is not how it goes. Obviously, the investigation goes from a missing person case to a homicide investigation, and that investigation was codenamed Operation Ruby. And even though there were roadblocks in the area and that there were over 6,000 motorists that were actually interrogated and questioned in the general area around where her body went missing, and $100,000 reward from the Sun newspaper, there were very, very few actual leads. And the context this is, what you've got to imagine is, the police are under a huge amount of pressure at this point. Like, obviously, it's a 13-year-old girl who goes missing in broad daylight, and they've had nothing. That, like, when we talk about leads thus far, there's very little to go on.
Yeah, and this and when we say broad daylight, this is 2002. Yeah, this isn't the days of Peter Sutcliffe, you know, the Yorkshire Ripper. By 2002, pretty much every business that you know would have had a form of CCTV. So when you've been in a cafe, when you've been at bus stops, high streets, things like that, of course there's going to be public pressure. There should be public pressure on you because you should be finding this girl. Yet, as of yet in the case, we're not really getting any closer until the officers dealing with it get a call from Metropolitan Police, who are based in London and are looking into another man at this time, don't they?
So yeah, the Met Police had arrested someone that they had evidence on, linking them to murders around the general area of southwest London. And the scary thing is that this man lived 50 yards away from the place in which Milly went missing. This man was called Levi Bellfield. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about him?
Levi Bellfield was born on the 17th of May 1968, meaning he was 35 at the time. He was born and lived more or less all of his life in southwest London, but the family home was actually one short by the time that Levi was 10 years old, after his father passed away from leukemia. Now, during his late teenage to early adult years, he worked a number of different jobs. He used to work on the doors sometimes, although not being, you know, a massive fella, of nightclubs and bars and things like that. And in the daytime, he actually used to have a business where he would do wheel clamping for cars.
And by all accounts, he was a fairly unscrupulous wheel clamper. I've heard some stories basically where he would go round and clamp cars that didn't necessarily deserve it and try and extort the people for money, because he was a big bloke and he could probably do that. But don't you know a bit more about this particular thing?
Don't know what you're going on about, mate.
Isn't there some sort of connection where, you know, for some reason you're connected to this man?
I'm not
What
connected.
can you say?
I'm definitely not connected to Levi Bellfield. I've got to be discreet in what I do say. So someone very, very close to me worked with Levi Bellfield around this time. And this person was close with Levi. Like, you know, they worked together. They were close together. We went to like family parties together, stuff like that. I won't name this person. He doesn't give glowing references of Levi Bellfield. Said that he could be a bit of a bully, said that he often talked down to women, and he actually told me a story of once he had to give Levi a right telling off and stick it right on him once because he shouted at his mother-in-law in front of him. And this person I'm talking about, from the sort of life that he's lived and community that he's from, you don't shout at women. You definitely don't do it in public places, things like that. So yeah, he had to give Levi dressing down on that occasion. But yeah, he knew him around that time. And what I would say, and this person that I'm talking about now is someone that would be like completely honest with me. What I would say is not only did the people around him have no idea of what he was up to, they didn't think he was capable of that. Levi was not the leader of the pack. Levi wasn't like, you know, Levi wasn't some mob boss or whatever. I've seen a lot of documentaries where they paint Levi in one way. This circle of people that Levi were around, they didn't massively respect him. And they definitely didn't fear him. I don't think a lot of people did. So there's the sort of background information I have on him that isn't like public knowledge. But from what is public knowledge, Levi had 11 different children to 5 different women. He was described as infectious at times, someone who could come across as your best friend, could also abruptly turn into someone who was very hostile at the same time. And former partners of Bellfield would say that he would come across as charming initially, but soon become paranoid, obsessive, controlling, and physically abusive. Now, he actually had charges brought against him in 2001 of abduction and of forced imprisonment and of attempted murder in 2003, but he was never sentenced for any of those charges. But as you say, when you've got someone who has a criminal record and who has the background that a Levi Bellfield did, he's obviously going to be someone who, because of the, I was about to say distance, it's yards. He literally lived yards from where Milly was last seen. Of course, the police were always going to give him a visit. They were always going to knock on his door. How many times did they knock on that door?
I've heard it's as many as 10 times, and every single time he wouldn't answer it. And I believe he was living with a partner at the time as well, and neither of them ever answered the door to the police in any of their investigations, which I think is that not suspicious in itself? Are the police not marking that down as someone that they're like, oh, I really need to get in touch with this person because they've been very elusive indeed?
I think what you've heard is definitely right. I would be massively concerned if someone wasn't to answer. At the same time as that, Levi was known to have multiple properties. I'm not sure whether they were properties he owned, but definitely multiple properties that he would stay in. He had different aliases as well, things like that. One of them we'll actually come on to in a bit. But yeah, police definitely dropped the ball, so to speak, in terms of a missed opportunity there.
So the next point in the story really comes from where the police are contacted again by another element of the force, and they said that they're working on another case which bears similarities, and they feel that there's a direct link potentially to the disappearance of Milly, don't they? So they effectively find that this young girl had been murdered. Her name was Amélie Delagrange, and she was an important part of finding the killer of Milly Dowler as well. So who was Amélie? She was a 22-year-old French student living in Twickenham, another beautiful leafy part of London, certainly a part of London that you don't expect there to be a lot of crime. She actually moved to the UK to study English and was actually working in a patisserie in Richmond. But on the evening of the 19th of August 2004, Amélie was on a night out with some mates from town. She got on a bus and headed home. Unfortunately for her, she dozed off and she missed her stop on the bus. She went a stop or two further on. She actually spoke to the bus driver and said, if I get off the bus now, how long do I need to wait for the next bus? He said, about 10 minutes or so. And she basically made the decision, unfortunately for her, that she would walk back from the bus to her home, which wasn't too far away.
So just quickly, I'm just going to jump in here, drawing some lines before you tell me what happened to Amélie. Two, I want to say women, obviously Milly Dowler was a child, but two females, both last seen either on public transport or in the vicinity of public transport. Yep. And both decide to walk home. So I can kind of see why there are some lines being drawn here, but I'd need to say a bit more concrete. What happened to Amélie?
What happened to Amélie was absolutely horrific. She gets off of the bus, and again, I suppose the driver was probably one of the last people to see her at that point, sees her getting off the bus. And almost from the moment that she does get off the bus, she is hit very hard with a blunt instrument on the back of her head. So badly so that it's described as a very severe blunt trauma injury. What is the saddest part of this is that Amélie was actually then left by herself, bleeding, actually on a cricket green in Twickenham. And the saddest part of this is that she was actually left by herself for over 2 hours until a dog walker found her. You can imagine what an awful state she was in. She was unconscious. You know, there was a pool of blood around her. She went to the hospital, and very sadly, she passed away on the same day. So the immediate question that I'd have then back to you then, Jerry, is we've got these two cases. How do they actually link what happened to Amélie back to Milly?
Well, it's a good question, because obviously we're always looking for patterns to emerge, aren't we? And despite the fact that they're both female, one of them has been tragically murdered and one is missing. They're different ages, slightly different looks, profiles and whatnot. I would need something in the middle to really make this a concrete link. And that is where we come on to Marsha McDonnell. Now, Marsha McDonnell was a woman that was murdered on the 4th of February 2003. She was another woman that was on her way home from a night out, and another woman that was hit over the head with a blunt object and left to die, unfortunately. The interesting thing about the death and discovery of Marsha McDonnell is she was discovered in Hampshire, the same place as Milly Dowler's body was found. And now that police are starting to gain a little bit of momentum, they're starting to join the dots together, the public are starting to do their thing as well. The calls are starting to come in, and one name is consistently being mentioned to police, and that is the name of Levi Bellfield. Milly Dowler was last seen at a bus stop that Levi Bellfield lived very close to. Amélie Delagrange was murdered after getting off of public transport, as was Marsha McDonnell.
And did you know that Levi Bellfield actually sold his Vauxhall Corsa car, which could have been captured in and around some of these cases in terms of the CCTV footage? He bought the car. Did you know this? He bought the car for $5,000.
Right.
And then 6 months later, sold it out of the blue for $1,500.
For £1,500.
1,500 quid. So there's a big loss in 6 months.
You took a big loss on that car.
But he wanted to get rid of it quickly.
Yeah.
And now why would he want to get rid of his car that quickly? Dots together.
Yeah, so what can be seen as suspicious behaviour like that is definitely going to have you on the police radar. And 2 months before the murder of Amélie, there was actually another horrific, yet this time non-fatal incident when on the 28th of May 2004, a woman called Kate Sheedy gets off of a bus. And when she starts walking home, she sees a car pulled over with all the lights on, but the driver's still in there and the engine still on. And she actually is a bit freaked out by this. And despite the fact that she actually lives on the same side of the road that she's walking, she actually crosses the road at that moment in time because she has such a gut-wrenching feeling that something's not right.
Well, you just see a person in a car with the lights off, the engine running at night time. It just feels completely weird, doesn't it? So the car at that point turns the light on. The engine is going and it starts accelerating, and it starts accelerating directly towards her, and the car actually hits her. So this doesn't fit the pattern of what we've just been talking about. The pattern that we've just been talking about is either an abduction or a random attack with a blunt instrument. So this feels slightly different, but in a weird way. It's a young girl.
It's
there
a
are
young
things that
girl
are similar. Getting off public transport.
It's a young girl getting off public transport, and who's to say whether or not this is the same person? But also, if you were to assume that it is the same person and we've got a potential serial killer on our hands, who's to say that there's not more than one way to skin a cat? Who's to say that they don't have different ways of carrying out different jobs? And the key thing I want to mention here is you called it a hit and run there. It was a hit and run.
It was, yeah. So there was the driver of this vehicle didn't just leave her alone. He then went back and ran her over again, and miraculously, and to be honest with you, I have no idea how she survived this, but she actually has the wherewithal to pick up a phone, call the police, and there's a gut-wrenching phone call where she's describing what had happened to her. You know, she was in immense pain at this point, desperate for an ambulance.
Where does it hurt? Everywhere. So he went over you twice? Yeah. And I really hurt.
But the ambulance did make its way to her. She was, transported to hospital. And thankfully, she, as you said, survived.
And as sort of morbidly ironic as this is, and I say this with the utmost respect to everyone involved, what happened to Kate was actually, from a police standpoint, almost a blessing in disguise, because this really broke the case open. Very much so like the Yorkshire Ripper case, and how the deck of cards started to fall with Peter Sutcliffe. This had similarities there, because now you had a survivor, and not only that, you had a survivor that was able to give you some details of the offender, or at least details of the incident. And that is exactly what she did, giving the police a full description of the car that hit her. And she said that she was hit by a white people carrier with blacked out windows, and most significantly, a broken wing mirror on the passenger side.
So now the net is very much closing in on Levi Bellfield. The police are gathering all of their evidence, and they start doing so by scanning through even more CCTV footage of the surrounding areas, and especially from the bus itself, wasn't it?
The public transport CCTV played a huge part in this case, because one thing that they saw very quickly was pretty much this vehicle tailing the bus, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly that. So the vehicle was a white van that was following this bus, and therefore probably had a target in mind. The vehicle was identified as a Toyota Previa, the exact same vehicle that Levi Bellfield owns. Then, when they were looking through the CCTV tapes of the previous buses of other victims, they were able to spot the same vehicle, and this is then when they go and make their arrest of Bellfield. So then they get Bellfield into an interview room, and the police for the first time get to question him about what had gone on and what he had done in and around these cases. And what is sick about this guy is the way that he sits and talks to the police, and you'll just see this in the interview tapes.
I believe you took her off the street that day. I believe your motivation was sexual, and I believe you took her back to Collingwood Place, and I believe you killed her there. That's the truth, isn't it?
No comment, sir.
That's what happened. And then you've used the day and next year to move her body. Is that the truth?
No.
Because that's what's happened, isn't it?
No comment.
And then sometime over the following few days, you've driven down to Hampshire, an area that you know, and you've dumped her body.
No comment, sir.
That's the truth, isn't it?
No comment, sir.
Now, due to the fact that Levi is obviously going no comment in the police interview, the police need to turn to those around him, family, friends, any acquaintances they can of Levi Bellfield. And significantly, their attention falls on his ex-partner, Emma Mills. She was actually living in the property that was knocked on multiple times, that was in the vicinity of Milly Dowler's disappearance. And she actually says that at the time of those police calls, they weren't there. They were actually house sitting for some friends. However, she does recall that Levi came back that evening, and he came back in different clothes as to what he had actually gone out in that day. She also says that Levi woke up at around 5 a.m. to go back to the other property. This is the property that is in the vicinity of where Milly Dowler was taken from.
And it wasn't just that. In the midst of all of this stuff going on, Levi randomly one day decides to move his entire family and his partner into a new property. And this isn't a commensurate level of property, is it? I mean, people have described this property as a squat. It was a really
He's
bad
moved him
place.
into a squat.
Yeah.
He's downgraded.
Yeah.
Now, why would you need
Why
to
would you do
downgrade?
that?
Why would you need to downgrade? I tell you what, though, his partner, Emma, at the time, said that a lot of things like bed sheets and equipment, they all went missing in the move. She couldn't find any of them.
And it wasn't just that. The day after Milly Dowler actually goes missing, Emma remembers this moment because Levi Bellfield goes back into the property that they weren't staying in. So we're talking about two properties, going back to the original property. She says that he was changing the bed sheets, something that he would never, ever, ever do. He was washing them. And his excuse for that occasion was that the dog had made a mess in the bed, and that is the reason why he was washing the bed sheets. It's very suspect timing.
Well,
Very suspect.
not only that, he actually made what now is just a haunting remark to his partner at the time. Now, listen, right? If you're a man and you live with a female, you will know that they ask you how something got spilt, how it got messed up, how that stain got there. You give them your answer, and then they might ask you between 50 to 60 more times, right? That's just how it works. However, when Levi's partner at the time asks about the dog making this mess, do you know what he did?
Come.
He turned round to her and said, "What, do you think I did, Milly?"
Did he actually say Milly? Did he actually say the name Milly?
To her, "What, you think I've done, Milly?" That was the quote that she recalls him saying to her. Now, look, I get it. It's in the area. Police have been knocking at that door and whatnot. But for my partner to say that to me, and for me to already have, I'm not saying suspicion, but a definite degree of unknowingness about what he gets up to in his life, it would just be massively concerning for me.
Yeah, and fair play to Emma for going to the police and telling them all of this information, because quite frankly, it was a key part of the case, wasn't it? But it wasn't just Emma that was speaking to the police, was it either? There was another ex that actually spoke to them as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, and this ex didn't necessarily have the same experiences with Levi as Emma did. She didn't really have a motivation to say anything too badly about Levi, but her name was Joanna, and she was an avid horse rider. That was what she used to absolutely love to do. And she says that her and Levi used to visit the spot where she would ride horses and stuff like that. They used to go there quite a lot. They would go there and they would walk the dogs around there and stuff, and they would go there and there would be other people riding horses and stuff like that. That spot that they would regularly visit was Yateley Woods.
And that was where Milly Dowler's body was found, wasn't it?
Yeah. And actually what Joanna did was she took them. The police said, "Oh, could you take us to the spot that you would regularly visit?" And she said, yeah. She literally walked them to the site of where Milly Dowler's body was found. And as far as I know, it wasn't public knowledge that Milly Dowler's body was found in this exact location. So she had almost connected the dots there and then for the police.
And this is where we start really going through what was the breakthrough in this case, I suppose. So in the midst of the police dealing with both Joanna and Emma as well, there was a revelation to the police from Emma. She actually remembers that Levi Bellfield, at the time of Milly's disappearance, was driving a red Daewoo Lexia car. And police were able to actually find this car on CCTV footage so they can confirm that it was being driven by Levi in the area. And this meant that they were able to go to the public about the car, which led to even more phone calls from the public.
Yeah, and there were like so many calls, probably hundreds, but I'll just tell you one incident that I just found deeply, deeply disturbing. And I think that if you are this person now, there's probably not a day that goes by where you don't think of this moment and think, God, what if I had have answered differently? And this is when the parent of 11-year-old schoolgirl Rachel Cowes calls in to the police, and she says that when Rachel was walking home from school, she was stopped by Levi in said vehicle, and Levi tried to convince her to take a lift off him, to get dropped home by him that day. And Rachel, with her wits about her, which you have to commend for, you know, such a young person as well, she declined that offer, and obviously would go on to realise that that was probably the best decision she made in her entire life.
Very much so. And really, this was key, wasn't it? Because it was linking the vehicle that we've just seen the evidence from, the vehicle that was featured in all of the CCTV evidence, with a motive and a modus operandi of Levi Bellfield. So all of those things came together, and the police had enough evidence to actually formally charge him and basically take the case to court at this point, right?
They were, and he was convicted of 2 murders and 1 attempted murder, which is obviously good. But at the same time as this, the police were still not able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that they had the man that had killed Milly Dowler.
Yeah, but she wasn't involved in those charges. So basically, they had to start and continue to build the case to actually find out what happened to Milly and actually convict Levi Bellfield. So the question is, how did they actually do that?
Well, experts were able to analyse more CCTV footage and narrow down the exact time and place that Milly Dowler was abducted from, and that came back as being Collingwood Place, the exact spot that Levi Bellfield was living in. Now, Collingwood Place had quite high bush growth around it, and what that meant was that you could be stood in the front garden of the property and you could see the bus stop, you could see the train station across the road, and also you could be stood less than a foot away from passers-by that walk along the pathway. However, until they get right to that point where the bush is, they're not able to see you there. Meaning you've got a real clear vantage point if you're spying on people, or potentially if you're looking for someone to abduct. Now, the details of what happened to Milly Dowler are vague, but what we do know is that there is about a 25-minute window in the time that Levi took Milly Dowler and when he next left the flat. His phone records do show him heading back towards the location of where himself and his girlfriend were house sitting at the time, but then the phone goes dead, and this is when there's around a 6-hour window of non-activity. And Josh, it doesn't take a genius to work out what was probably going on in this 6 hours.
Was it literally his phone was off, like as in I mean, we don't know, do we? Like basically his phone wasn't operational at the time.
No, I mean,
hours.
look, it was 2002, so it was like the infancy of smartphones. The chances are he probably had a Nokia 3210.
It was probably a Nokia 3310.
Probably a Nokia 3310, right?
So at that point, there's only one thing that we expect to be happening. This is where he's disposing of the body.
This is where he's getting rid of the body. Again, what I would like to know is in that amount of time that he left the flat and when he went back to the flat, which is obviously the flat in question in the vicinity of where Milly was taken from, is what sort of state was she in? Was she alive at that time? And, you know, unfortunately, we'll never know.
So yeah, the court and the police, they try and find out more information about what actually happened. But obviously Levi Bellfield at this point is just doing no comments. You've seen the interviews. He has a very clear structure of what he does when he gets in police interviews, just no comment the entire time. So he was formally charged for Milly Dowler's abduction and murder on the 30th of March 2010. This is 8 years after her original abduction. And he was also charged with the attempted kidnapping of Rachel Cowes. Then she was only a very young girl, again, as we've described earlier on, when she went missing. And again, key thing to remember, that was the day before Milly actually went missing, the Rachel case, which is just so scary.
Can I give you my thing about the court case that just pissed me off the most was what his defence tried to use in relation to Milly Dowler's disappearance, what they were calling it. Basically, they were using diary entries of a 13-year-old girl, right? They were using diary entries, and from these diary entries, they were trying to use it as proof that she was unhappy, she wasn't comfortable in her own skin, and therefore she might have wanted to run off, she might have wanted to take her own life, something like that, which I get it, right? It is these people's jobs to defend criminals, and I understand that, you know, like we understand that that is a job and we don't hold it against them. But fuck me, to come up with something that pathetic, to even stand and have the audacity to waste a judge's time by saying, yeah, look, in this 13-year-old girl's diary, you know, she said, oh, she might not be as pretty as the other girls at school. What a load of shit that is. Like, you know, you're literally going through puberty at that age. You're hormonal. I know that I could have had a day as a 13-year-old. Bloody hell, as a 31-year-old now, I might have a day where if I've written a diary every day, I've had a shit day by 5 o'clock, and from 5 till 12 o'clock, midnight, I had a great day. Things can change. It was almost laughable if it wasn't for such a tragic situation, how they tried to use this in court.
It's a disgrace. And it wasn't just that as well. They obviously have to get the parents onto the stand as well, Milly Dowler's parents, and they're cross-referencing them as well, not just on the diary, but also their relationship with their daughter, about whether they might have mistreated her, about maybe that's the reason why she wanted to run away and why she disappeared. Again, it's just a complete disgrace. I understand why defense lawyers do it. They have to do their job. They get paid to do it. But I find the insensitivity, knowing how brutal and how awful this man was, I just find it very hard to reconcile. It's a tough thing to get your head around. And I have to say, you don't feel a lot of sympathy for the lawyers involved in the defense at all.
No. Luckily, though, by July 2011, which is just mental when you look at the timeline of not just Milly Dowler, but all of the victims of Levi Bellfield. And, you know, listen, there are suspected victims out there in their tens, if not more, you know, unsolved cases from these sort of areas that Levi Bellfield could very, very easily be connected to. But in July 2011, he is found guilty.
Yep.
Now, once again, Josh, I'm awful with maths. I know that it means he's serving 3 life sentences, but there's multiple charges here. Do you know how much time he actually got given?
It's actually really difficult to put a number on it because they're whole life orders. So it's actually difficult to get a number of years. And the British legal system don't do it in the same way the American legal system does in terms of like giving you an amount of time. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think he was one of the first UK prisoners to actually get 3 whole life orders in this way, just because of the barbarity of the crimes. So yeah, he got a significant time in prison, and let's speak no bones about it, deservedly so.
Definitely. Now, one thing that we always take a huge interest in these cases is what happens to the perpetrators afterwards, you know, when they get sent to prison. What is their time like in prison? You know, has anything happened since? Are there any more stories to come out of this case? And unfortunately, there are. And there are quite a few here. The first one wasn't actually involving Levi Bellfield himself. It was involving the Daily Mirror. It came out in the aftermath that the Daily Mirror, amongst many, many other people, celebrities, high-profile names, businessmen and whatnot, Milly Dowler was one of the victims of the phone hacking scandal from the Daily Mirror. They had actually been listening to her voicemails. Now, at the time, back then in the day, we all used to have like pre-recorded voicemails. So now it will just say, your call has been forwarded to voicemail. But back in the day, it would be, right, it's Joey here, blah, 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 whatever. You'd have your voicemail. And the family of Milly Dowler took comfort in being able to ring her phone and just to hear her voice again. I know that's something that I would definitely do if I had the opportunity with loved ones that have passed away in my life and whatnot. But all of a sudden, the mailbox became full and therefore they weren't able to do this. And this was a direct result of the Daily Mirror hacking in to the voicemail phone box of Milly Dowler. Now, the journalists actually deleted previous voicemails that were in her inbox so that they could make room for new ones, in the hope that they could maybe catch a family member or something like that ringing her phone and confessing, which to me is just absolutely mental. And the £2 million in damages and compensations that they were paid, the Dowler family, by the Daily Mirror for this, doesn't really go a whole way to papering over the cracks of actually what they did there and just how sinister that incident was. An incident, by the way, that was from what was at the time supposed to be a respected newspaper. You know, you had Piers Morgan as one of their editors at the time, and has publicly admitted, Piers Morgan, by the way, to knowing about the phone hacking scandal while it was ongoing, while he was working there.
Yeah, from one sick man to the other, Piers Morgan to Levi Bellfield. What about this guy's time in prison?
Well, Levi's actually admitted to multiple crimes and unsolved murders during his time in prison. However, none have been solved by police as a result of this. And I do think that police feel that he's just trying to waste their time and get time out of his cell. Now, in 2009, Levi Bellfield was attacked by a fellow inmate with a makeshift weapon at HMP Wakefield and accused prison staff of refusing to protect him. Now, Josh, who would refuse to protect a man like Levi Bellfield?
I just think it's a disgrace, to be honest. Those prison staff should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, you say that. This may come as a shock to you, but at the expense of the prison and of the taxpayer. More significantly, Levi Bellfield was granted a £4,500 payout from the prison as a result of this attack.
Why? Why does he deserve that?
Fuck knows.
It doesn't make any
I've
sense.
literally got no idea
Yeah.
of anything I could tell you. In June 2023, it was announced that Levi Bellfield had changed his name to Yusuf Rahman and had converted to Islam. That is the last that we had actually heard of Levi Bellfield, and we haven't heard any more since. But one thing that I do want to bring attention to in this case, and it's very fitting that I've actually mentioned the Yorkshire Ripper case quite a few times in this video, because this is something that happened in that case too. But on the Levi Bellfield front, it happened even more so. And this is sort of copycats, police time being wasted by people. And there were actually people that were sent to prison for doing so. Starting off with a man named Paul Hughes, who in April 2003 was sent to prison for harassing the family of Milly Dowler. He was calling them, he was sending them letters, and he was claiming to be her killer, and also he was threatening the family of Milly Dowler and threatening that he would come and do the same that he claimed to have done to Milly. Now, the maddest thing about these letters is they were being sent from inside a prison cell where he was already locked up and serving time for an indecent assault of a 12-year-old. Leanne Newman was also arrested in April of 2003 for calling the family and the friends of Milly Dowler, as well as the school that Milly attended, and putting on voices pretending to be Milly Dowler. What sort of sick person do you need to be even fantasizing about doing these sort of things?
There's some sick people around this case, but I have to say, like, that is one of the worst.
And a man named Gary Farr was also arrested and then sectioned under the Mental Health Act for claiming that he had information leading to Milly's whereabouts, and basically saying that she had been trafficked and smuggled out to Poland. Much like all of the prior people that had called in, given information, made up lies, this was exactly that. This was a lie. But just incredible to see how a case that sort of gripped the public could bring out these disgusting members of society who would even want to put the family through such trauma on top of what they're already experiencing. And I think this is a good time to pay homage to the family of Milly Dowler herself, and everyone involved, all of the victims of Levi Bellfield, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a case that affected so many people around the sort of southwest London area. And we've named some of the victims that Levi Bellfield was actually charged with and sentenced for his crimes. There were other people that apparently were linked to this case as well, and families that might not have ever received justice for what had happened to their loved ones. So we send our thoughts and our prayers to all of those as well, and also all of the families of the victims that we've discussed as well. Really tough case to discuss, I have to say. And Levi Bellfield, horrible man, and very much hope that he rots in prison for the rest of his days.
Yep. Hopefully there's not too many of them days left, if I'm being completely honest. But as always, it's always a hard case to cover when, I think, especially for myself, when there's children involved, when there's females involved and things like this. But it is a case that has been heavily requested by our members. You can, of course, become a membership. There is a link in the description. That will mean that you will be able to access the videos that we upload up to 48 hours before the general public do. And you will be in a very special pool of people who have an exclusive weekly members live stream for them, where they can interact with myself and Josh and give us suggestions potentially for episodes that you want us to cover coming up. I would say out of the last 10 episodes we've done, at least 6 or 7 of them now have been suggested to us by our members, haven't they?
Yep, and this is the thing, we always take the members' suggestions very, very seriously indeed. And as you say, they've come up with some fantastic cases that we've had to cover.
There you go.
We really appreciate all of the comments.
If you're a new member coming in, it's going to be hard to beat the suggestions
legends
that we've already
in
had
there.
covered, but you can give it a go. People, like the video if you got round to the end of it, subscribe to the channel if you are not already, and let us know in the comment section below your thoughts on the video and what you want to see covered next. We will see you all in the next one.